Naomi Elkins had what a lot of people want and cannot have, and frankly, something that even money can't necessarily buy. What is that? Two beautiful children, two little girls, 1 year old and 3 year old. So, why would she possibly stab the 1 year old in the stomach and then drown her, and then chase down her 3 year old who was trying to hide, put her in another tub, and drown her? Why? Greed, the sin. Greed is defined as an intense and selfish desire for something, an excessive, extreme desire that often is more than one's own proper share. The why behind the crime, the motive. I'm Ashley Willcott. I'm a TV anchor, a former judge, former trial attorney, and I would say that almost every single case I've covered intersects with one of the seven deadly sins, the motive. Pride, greed, wrath, envy, lust, gluttony, and sloth. The opposite of seven heavenly virtues. Temptations that, when taken too far, turn deadly. This week, we break down the case of Naomi Elkins and why I think it was the sin of greed that turned a mother of two young children murderous. A little bit later, I'm joined by attorney Sue Ann Robinson in our breakdown segment to go deep on the how and the why of one of the most horrific cases of the 21st century. Let's get into it. This is the Deadly Seven. Naomi Elkins killed her two daughters. We know this because she admitted it. Here's what she said. She said she drowned each of her two children in two separate bathtubs in her home for religious reasons. She admitted that she first plunged the knife into the younger child's stomach, but not believing that that was actually going to kill her, she went ahead and put the 1 year old in a bathtub. She held her underwater for 2 to 3 minutes. And she said, I counted to 50 several times to make sure she was dead. Now, the 3 year old saw what was happening, so she tried to run away in the house and hide. But Elkins tracked her down, took her to another bathtub in the house, climbed on top of her, and held her down while she filled the bathtub with water. Elkin herself then called 911, but when the first responders arrived, they pronounced both children dead on the scene. This is a hard case, and I want to offer my perspective from the bench on 5 things that should terrify you about this case. Number 1, Naomi was only 27 years old. She was married. She had a 1 year old and a 3 year old. A idyllic life by all accounts. Should terrify you. She then ended up killing both of her children. The second thing that should terrify you is that she admitted she killed them because she believed that either her or her husband were the Messiah, that this was for religious reasons. So, how does a mother go from apparently being a doting mother to, oh, I'm doing this for religious reasons and I'm going to kill both of my children? The third thing that you should know about this case, and again is a terrifying fact, is after her admitting this, what she did, the horrific way in which she killed both of her children, she was actually found not guilty by reason of insanity. That means that, yes, she committed the crime, but she's not guilty because she met the legal definition of insanity. And we'll do a deep dive into that definition when our guest joins us. Item number 4, because she was found not guilty by reason of insanity, she was committed to a secure psychiatric hospital for a total of 150 years, 2 lifetime sentences, 1 lifetime sentence for each child killed. But that leads me to the most terrifying number 5 fact in this case. Although she's committed to those life sentences in a psychiatric facility, keep this in mind. She can get out if there's a point when she is no longer considered a danger to herself or others. She can get out when she killed her 2 children in the horrific way in which she did after tracking down her 30-year-old who saw the crime against the one-year-old. She can get out. Joining me next, Sue Ann Robinson, an experienced attorney who's broken down many cases with me to help us understand how this is possible and the why, the greed that I believe caused her to commit these horrific murders. I am so honored and pleased and tickled to have attorney Sue Ann Robinson in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. You are a former prosecutor, a criminal defense attorney. You offer your expertise in legal analysis on cases that are covered all over the country. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you so much, and I'm tickled as well, Judge Ashley.
Well, we are going to really get into the deep, some of the things I really don't understand and can't make sense of in this case. You know, as a former judge, you think you've seen it all, and then you see another case, and it's like, gosh, let's make sense of this. Because the first thing I want to get your reaction to is when you hear a 27-year-old mother who's married, so there are 2 individuals in the home helping provide for 2 children, arguably, that the children are young, they're only 1 and 3. And then you hear not only that she murdered the 2 children, but the way in which she did it, that she put them in 2 separate bathtubs, that she stabbed the younger one to realize, "Well, that's not gonna kill her. What am I gonna do? Oh, yeah, let me put her in a bathtub and make sure that she's drowned." And then, knowing the 3-year-old saw it, is trying to hide in the house, tracking her down to go to a different bathtub and put her in a different bathtub to hold her down, counting to 50 with the first one a couple of times to make sure she's dead. What's your initial reaction to this?
Just horror because, there's no expectation that a mom, someone who gave life to these people, would do
Mhm.
something so heinous and just so horrible. It's just shocking to the conscience.
It's that expectation. I'm glad you used that word because you would never expect this to happen. And so I start to look at the why it happened, the motive, the 7 deadly sins. And this one's a little unique. I came up with greed. And here's the reason, because I felt like the only way a mother could really do something like this must be because she's greedy. She's greedy to have it her way. She's greedy to get rid of her children. And so she came up with this way to follow through and the motive, and we'll get back into that in a little bit, but what do you think? And you may feel like greed's not this at all. What's your thought about the motive?
I think for the motivation for something so absolutely heinous has to be, definitely something otherworldly, right? It can't be something that you and I and us just average in society can even fathom or understand. But she definitely, in her movements and how she did it, was very controlling to your point.
Mm.
Like, she wants to be in control. She wants to make sure that her plan is effectuated to harm these children and to end their lives, and she was very specific and calculated about each and every step to make sure that she maintained control, make sure that there's no witnesses, make sure that, she held the children down adequate time to ensure that they would actually be there to take their lives. I mean, it definitely shows, a situation where she's wants to have control over every aspect. And I think, greed can fit if she's greedy to just be the person that's in control as opposed to having being a mother and the kids and everything and their kind of rhythm controlling her. That could be it. That could be what happened.
And I wonder too if it could be a religious greed. And by that, I mean doing it for a religious reason. But the aspect of going to such an extreme, I want to share with you and all of our listeners and viewers something that she herself wrote in a letter. Now, this letter was written following the murders, and this is just a little piece of it. But here's what I want to share with you in her own words. I thought I loved you, God, my creator. You are evil, undeserving of death and destruction. I don't know what I was. I loved my children, but I loved you more. I put me before my kids. How could a Jewish mother do that? How? How is it possible? Calling God evil, loving God more, that's not a God that many people would worship or go to. And that's not the way most people would describe whatever their faith is, God or otherwise.
Right, absolutely. Even in that letter, there's definitely evidence of her trying to be in control of even the narrative that, oh, it's because this relationship between her and her description of how she's describing her relationship with God is very interesting. But I definitely think this is a case where could only fit under insanity, right? Because there's no way that you could be in your right mind and harm your kids in this way.
So let's talk about that because a lot of people watch cases and say she's crazy. You hear what she did to her own children and you think she's obviously crazy. But there's a very different thing between a diagnosis. There is no such thing as a DSM 5 of crazy, but a diagnosis of someone's mental health versus the legal definition of insanity. So let's talk a little bit about what it means in a court of law to say someone is legally insane. What does that mean to you?
To me, the definition has always meant that they lack capacity to actually form the mens rea, the criminal intent to commit the crime. It doesn't mean that they're not going to be, I guess, separated from society because she's still going to a psychiatric facility locked down 24 hours a day for 150 years. It just means that criminally under the law, you're for most crimes, you have to have mens rea, criminal intent that is formed by the motive, the modus operandi, what you've done. But because what she did is so outside the realm, the law gives her kind of I mean, I say a shield, but it's not really a shield, but the defense of saying that, you know, she was insane. She was in fact not having the requisite capacity to commit the crime.
Right, she couldn't form that mens rea, and, we know that anytime a defense claims that a person's legally insane in response to crimes committed or allegedly committed, you're gonna have experts because you have to have a psychologist or a psychiatrist who can testify as to the state of the person at the time of the crime. It doesn't matter what they might be like now sitting in jail or before the crime when they were raising their children, but rather at the time of the crime. We know that experts have to weigh in when a court is going to determine whether or not a person's legally insane at the time of the crime. It has to be at the time of the crime. It can't be after, it can't be before. So there was, of course, such an expert in this case, psychologist Pirelli. He did testify in court that his opinion was that Elkins was undoubtedly psychotic at the time that she killed the children. When you hear the facts of this case as a former prosecutor, and if you were prosecuting this case, would you automatically think, uh-oh, she's legally insane? Or would you hold back and say maybe this was a premeditated, she knew what she was thinking and doing case?
I think based on the fact that it her actions are very calculated, it's very calculated within her psychosis based on what the experts say, but I think just looking at it you would say wow, that is a very calculated crime in terms of all of the actions that she took, the separate bathrooms, tracking her youngest to make sure, that they weren't able to hide and get away. So it looks like an extremely heinous crime that is calculated. But I also understand the expert's analysis in saying that at the time she was committing these actions, she was doing it within her psychosis.
Are you surprised if I were to share with you what you already know that the Ocean County Prosecutor's Office agreed that she was legally insane? So this wasn't a case where there was a trial about whether or not she's legally insane. They heard from the expert and agreed to that.
Yeah, I think once the expert kind of weighs in, then
Mhm.
as a prosecutor, as a lawyer, you have to defer on their reasoning because we're not medically trained to say, you know, we're more trained to say, okay, if this expert has opined this, then we apply that to the law.
Right, which is what we have to do, and they did say, quote, unquote, "This was a tragedy of epic proportions." I think all of us can agree with that. That's what the prosecutor's office had to say about it. So, Anne, I have to get into the part that I think will be the most disturbing for everyone who follows this case, hears about this case, and that is we know she got 2 life sentences of commitment to a psychiatric institution. So, when someone is found incompetent because they're legally insane, then we know that the sentence is gonna be treatment, not in a jail. So, she's sent to this psychiatric institution for 2 life sentences, 1 for each of the 2 children, but it doesn't mean necessarily she's gonna stay there, and I wanna recall the Slender Man case that I'm sure you remember. Remember this one where the 2 girls took their friend out to the woods and stabbed her because Slender Man told them to, and the video game, and in that case, also went to psychiatric and has been petitioning to get out, saying, "Listen, no longer considered a danger to herself or to others based on the experts that are treating her." Now, Morgan Geyser's not yet been released, although she's asked for it. But in this particular case, let's make clear Elkins is still in the facility. But arguably, there could come a time, she was young when this happened, 27. She's young. There could come a time in the immediate future, even when experts say, hey, she's no longer considered a danger to herself or someone else. And then she gets out. And I think that feels wrong.
Absolutely. Of course, in a case like this, there's not a punishment or a prison big enough that could hold someone who would commit a crime such as this. There isn't even a word in the English language to describe when a parent loses a child, much
Mhm.
less, you have orphans, when you don't have, parents, and you have widows, when people lose their spouse, but you don't have a word for when a child loses a parent. So that's how much our society just is not prepared to deal with that, and then not deal with when it's done by a parent. So it would be very hard to deal with her having an opportunity to have a second life after committing such a heinous crime.
And the reality too is the benefit to being in any mental health treatment facility is that's all they're doing is treating your mental health. So you have all of the resources you need literally in a building, whether it's medication, therapy, counseling, whatever the experts deem is appropriate, it's right there. And so what I always struggle with is should an individual with mental health issues be given an opportunity to live on the outside after committing a crime? I understand why the argument is yes, because it's a mental health issue. It's not, I decided to kill someone. I had the thought, the mens rea, to go kill these people, but rather I have a mental health issue. The problem I have, and that we see over and over and over again, Sue Ann, is that individuals with mental health issues get the treatment. And then, if released because they're not a danger to themselves or someone else, can be triggered by all the things in the real world outside of those 4 walls, or they may choose not to take their medications, or they may not show up at the court ordered counseling and could commit a crime immediately upon release. And that's I really, even as a judge, and I had to be fair and impartial and unbiased, but now from this side, that can be very hard to swallow.
Right, the relapse. What do you do if a
Mm.
person relapses after all the resources and time have been put into them being rehabilitated? It's almost makes the argument for people going to prison in some settings um, better, in the sense that it's like if you relapse from prison, it's understandable in the sense that you haven't been sitting there going through treatment for years and years. You've just been living with prison population, surviving in that environment. Whereas if someone's in a psychiatric facility, you would hope that the chances of them relapsing is less. But that's why in these clinical situations, everyone relies so heavily on the experts to be able to say, "Hey, listen, if this person is outside of this setting and away from you, the treating physicians, are they still going to be able to maintain that same level of not being a danger to themselves or others? How do you keep them away from their triggers and things like that?" It becomes very difficult once they've been separated for that treatment. How do they become reintegrated?
So, and let me just be clear. I don't think she's going to get released, not anytime soon, because there's going to be a lot of necessary treatment before an expert might even recommend it. And then there's a process. So it's not as if one person says, she's fine, not a danger, let her out. That's not how our system works. So I don't expect her to get out. Maybe not ever, certainly not anytime soon. But here's the other struggle I have: red flags. We know that with these kinds of mental health issues. And again, I'm going to stand by greed for the religion, um, greed for the deliberate, controlled piece of what she did again to her 1 year old and her 3 year old, her two beautiful daughters. I still stand by. And part of this for me is also the greed of others to ignore red flags. Here's what I mean by that. I'm not blaming anyone. The husband's a victim, the family's a victim. They've lost their family to murder by the mother. But I am going to suggest that I think there are often red flags, especially with mental health issues. Now, most people aren't going to think they're going to kill my children, right? Nobody goes there in their mind and says, oh, they're going to kill my children unless it's an extreme red flag. But I think when there are red flags and mental health issues or behaviors that are off, so I think sometimes there's a greed to really ignore red flags because
Mhm.
people don't want to have to deal with the odd behaviors or the concerning behaviors, and people don't think, oh, it's going to lead to murder.
No, that's true. It's an idea of wanting to keep your routine and not have to deal with the changes that if you actually respond to these red flags could turn, your world upside down. So I definitely get what you're saying in terms of a desire to just kind of keep things level status quo could lead to people being like, okay, did she has she not slept in 72 hours or not feeding the kids or not being responsive? Uh, yeah, but let me just kinda keep it pushing and hope, things turn around or resolve themselves. So I definitely think there's an issue where, people again, just crave that status quo and just keeping their routine the same as opposed to, responding to those things and then yes, you may have to be Baker acted and taken away and different agencies have to come in to help with the kids or something like that. If they actually had responded to those red flags.
Yeah, it's that intense desire, to your point, to keep things as they are, the routine, keep everything in place, and things will just get better. In this case, they certainly didn't get better. Do you have any last thoughts as it is a tragedy, there's no other word for it. Hopefully, she'll get the help that she needs, but any last thoughts about this case and her 2 beautiful daughters?
Yeah, I absolutely echo your sentiments in that, it's a very heinous case. There isn't any adequate punishment for something like this, and I do hope that she gets the help that she needs, and that her kids are able to, rest in peace.
Yeah, same. Suanne, I adore you. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.